We are live.
We are now live,
Excellent.
Madam Chair.
Now live. Excellent. Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm calling this meeting to order. And would you please join me in pledging allegiance to the flag? Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic. Oh, wait.
I finished.
Thank you. We finished, Will.
Okay.
About Ibarra, would you please do the roll call? Thank you.
Chair Bill de la Peña,
Present.
Commissioner Berg,
Here.
Commissioner Crosswhite,
Here.
Commissioner Edmonds, Commissioner Haney, Commissioner Heitman,
Here. Wait to take that over there.
Commissioner Humphrey,
Here.
Commissioner Long,
Here.
Commissioner Judge, Commissioner
Here.
McDonald,
Here.
Commissioner Parks,
Here.
Commissioner Simons,
Here.
Commissioner Tremblay,
Here.
Commissioner White,
Here.
Commissioner Zaragoza,
Here.
Interim Caltrans District Director Roberts.
Here.
Okay.
Thank you. And we will now go to public comments. Have we received any public comments?
There are no public comments at this time, Chair Bill de la Peña.
Okay, thank you. Then we can move to item number 5, which is the Caltrans report, and that will be presented by Ms. Roberts. Good morning and
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. I just, as Director Kettle had mentioned, we have a new district director that has been appointed, Tony Tavares. He's actually the current district director for District 4, San Francisco Bay Area. So we're very excited that he's willing and able to come over and lead District 7 and make the move to Southern California, the better part of the state. So we're really excited to have him start. He'll officially be on board on November 30th. So until then, any questions that you have, you may please feel free to reach out at any time. Roxana did send out the list of projects that are in Ventura County. And so I just wanted to bring your attention to a couple that are on the design portion, projects number 5 and 6, that will be moving into the construction phase in winter of 2021, which is between January and March. And so those 2 projects, we will be doing some public outreach before it starts so that the communities impacted will have a chance to be familiar with some of the traffic, the scope of the project, and traffic mitigations that will be in place. And so at this time, I don't have any further updates. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roberts. We will now move to item number 6, which is the commissioners and the executive director report. Are there any commissioners who would like to make a report?
I could give a report on my SCAG meeting yesterday, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you. Let me pull it up real quick because I actually have something here. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't like it when I can't see the screen because I'm looking at something else. Yesterday we had Transportation Committee and our regional committee. I wanted to make sure that you all knew about the Southern California Economic Summit that's coming up on December 1st. I will make sure that Darren has the information to pass along to you in case you want to register and attend. It's virtual, so it's easy to attend. That was the big thing that came out. We also had, during the Transportation Committee, we had a great presentation on hydrogen and electric buses. So I'm going to try and find if I could get that passed along, and maybe in the future we could see that. That's it.
Chair Bill De La Pena, could I add on to Commissioner Judge on
Commissioner,
the SCAG report? And our regional council had Secretary Wade Crowfoot speak to us, and we passed a resolution related to, or actually, I think that will be at our next agenda, but we had before us a resolution regarding climate change and what we can do from a regional response towards mitigation and adaptation too.
thank you very much. Good. Mr.
This is
Kittle.
Long.
Oh,
I
Mrs.
have a question.
Yeah.
Or a comment. I did want to say thank you very much to Caltrans. Throughout the COVID-19, they're still working extremely hard to fix our roads around our area. We have been on the conversations with Lewis Road in Camarillo and wanted again to say thank you for that. And then also just my heart goes out to those bus drivers that had the one that had gotten sick. Maybe there was more, but I just appreciate the openness to know what's going on and making sure that the process is being followed for getting testing and making sure that people stay well. So just thank you very much for everyone's efforts.
Thank you, Commissioner Long. Mr. Kettle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have just a couple of items from the Executive Director's report. I think first of all, the move of VCTC's relocation from Ventura to Camarillo has happened. We are now in our space here in Camarillo at 751 Daily Drive. I am sitting in my office, and you can see rather sparse walls at the moment. So that's one indication that a move has happened, but we are here. Our staff is still generally working remotely most of the time. So to even attempted this move in these times is probably a little bit crazy, but we were able to accomplish that thanks in large part to our staff doing a lot of work. And specifically, I'd like to call attention to the hard work of our clerk, Roxana Ibarra, who again has only been with us since April, and worked extremely hard to make sure that the move went off very smoothly, as well as Steve Effner, who's our IT manager. And there are two people, and they probably did the work of 20. So I really want to acknowledge their efforts in the move. And the space is very nice, and we'll look forward to doing an open house sometime in the new year, so you can come and see the new space, because it is a very nice step up from where we were in our offices in Ventura. So we're happy to be here. And again, Roxanne and Steve did great work. I want to call attention also to the next couple of months, just so for planning purposes. As we all know, we've gone through an election cycle. Election cycles do change things. And as we look towards the next 2 months, we have a couple of things that we will need to address at VCTC. We have several appointees from VCTC to regional bodies and other activities that VCTC are members of. And so we will be in January bringing appointments to, as we would normally do, we have terms in all of these offices, but it's particularly noticeable when we've had an election cycle if we have changes. So we will have several seats, and I will be informing the commission as to what those seats are, kind of what the time obligations are, so that you can consider those, opportunities should time permit, and then those appointments would take place in January. Also along those lines, just so the commission's aware, we do, as you all know, have two very passionate and committed public members that represent the County Board of Supervisors, in Commissioner Jim White and then Commissioner Brian Humphrey, who represents, serves as a public member representing cities. The term for the representative, the public member representing cities, expires in January 31st of 2021. The process that we use is using the City Select Committee process, where we work with the City Selection Committee to make that seat, the term is expiring, and that public members can pursue that appointment through their individual local jurisdictions. There is not a term limit, so in this case, Commissioner Humphrey very well may wish to pursue that seat again. But want to make sure that you're aware that we will be starting that process, because it does take a little bit of time to go through the city select process and work with all of our local jurisdictions to make sure the information is out there. So just wanted you to be aware of that. And then lastly, if you'll bear with me, I'm going to try to share my screen. Give me one moment. Let's see here. And so many of you are going to recall that we have a year or so ago, we started a new program working with youth programs to try to elevate awareness with generally elementary age students. In the past, we'd used the elementary schools, and that became a bit unwieldy. So we started a program last year where we went with all the Boys and Girls Clubs in Ventura County and did an art contest. And of course, last year, many of you who were on the commission will recall a very, very full Camarillo City Council chambers with a lot of very happy kids and some parents. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that this year, and it was going to be virtually impossible to try to do it virtually. But we did go through the contest, and we will be placing decals on all of our buses with the winners of that competition. Just very quickly, I'm going to go through so you can see the winners from the various Boys and Girls Clubs that will be on the side of our big blue buses. So here's our winner from Camarillo. I should say the theme this year was, what will transportation be like in 100 years? And so you will see some interesting perspectives that come from our young people. This is Camarillo. I think this is probably, I'd call it a bit more of a traditional transportation mode, a car and a town.
Darren, are we supposed to be able to see those right now? Because we can't.
You cannot. Okay, well, bear with me.
No,
Hold
you
on.
just shared the screen. Thank you.
Did I share it or not share it? We cannot see it. Okay, hold on, bear with me. Okay, hold on. I thought I had shared my screen. My mistake, folks. Okay, that should be there now, right? Please tell me it's there.
It's there. Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. So let me go back to this. So there we go. I'm sorry. This is why I have really good people that help me, and commissioners that will be patient with me. So anyway, there we go. So there's Camarillo. Again, a bit more, like I said, more traditional car town. Conejo Valley, you want to see creativity, we got a little bit of that. And
Reminds me of the 60s.
yeah, it's just a bit psychedelic, but that's okay. You know? We have flying cars, and if you look to your right side of your screen, a dog and a flying recliner. I'm all in for that one. This is Moore Park. Again, we've got in this case flying buses. I think Commissioner Simons, that may be the new development on High Street. I'm not positive, but it may be. This is Oxnard. It took us a little bit of time to get to this, but you do have a kid holding on for dear life with a rocket-powered scooter. And I think this is in the middle. It's a hover bus going through downtown. I think. Santa Clara River Valley. You can again. I think this is an indication that we're still all going to be using active transportation, meaning walking around our streets. And Simi Valley, we've got flying cars. In an effort to sort of go back in time, we're actually going to bring back dinosaur power in 100 years. And then we have a bird on a motorbike. Again, Ventura. Clearly young people see us. We are not going to be on the ground. We are going to be flying around in the air in whether it's our own cars, whatever, floating vehicles and buses. So those will be on the side of our buses. And let me see if I can stop my share.
It's colorful.
And those will be, like I said, so you will be seeing those on the side of our buses. They are all going to, and this year we're actually going to be putting the decal, it's a see-through decal that's going to be on the windows of the buses, the right rear of the buses. So we're going to try and see if that helps them stand out a little bit more because they'll be sitting up a little higher. Madam Chair, that is your Executive Director's report. I'm happy to respond to questions.
Thank you so much. That was a colorful presentation. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Are there any questions or comments?
Excellent presentation, Ms. Bob Huber. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob.
Anyone else? All right.
This is Kelly. Just thank you for continuing the program, even with all the hardship we're going through. I think it's great that we still keep up those traditions.
Thank you.
Will you be doing a press release on this?
Yes, we will be doing that as we get ready to post the decals. We were going to actually be doing it this weekend, but with the rain, we're holding off for another week. So we'll be putting something out probably sometime next week in anticipation of them being on the buses in about a week and a half.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, we can now move on to item number 8, which is number 7. Are there any additions or revisions of the agenda? I don't think anything is.
Not from staff, Madam Chair.
Very good. Item number 8 is the consent calendar. I'm looking for
this is long. I'll move to approve.
Huber, second.
I have a motion by Commissioner Long, seconded by Commissioner Huber. Ms. Ibarra, should we take a roll call?
Yes. Chair Bill de la Peña,
Yes.
Commissioner Byrd,
Yes.
Commissioner Crosswhite,
Yes.
Commissioner Edmonds,
Yes.
Commissioner Haney, Commissioner Heitman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Huber,
Yes.
Commissioner Humphrey,
Yes.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Commissioner Judge,
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald,
Yes.
Commissioner Parks,
Yes.
Commissioner Simons,
Yes.
Commissioner Tremblay,
Yes.
Commissioner White,
Yes.
Commissioner Zaragoza.
Yes.
All right, and that passes unanimously. We will now move to item number 9, which I think is going to be very exciting. Update or presentation on wildlife corridors and conservation. And I think that item will be introduced by Ms. Fagan. Is that true?
Yes, that's correct. Hi, good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Amanda Fagan, and I'm the Director of Planning and Policy here at VCTC. VCTC recognizes a significant public interest in the relationship between transportation and wildlife crossing, particularly in the Santa Monica Mountains. Several current and upcoming planning and design projects consider that relationship, including 101 Communities Connected Multimodal Corridor Study, which you will hear more about later on in the agenda. Our Future 101, which is more commonly known as the US 101 High Occupancy Vehicle Express Bus Lanes Project, and the forthcoming countywide Comprehensive Transportation Plan update, which will include further study on multi-benefit highway and multimodal transportation projects that foster connectivity for wildlife within and between natural habitats. To provide us with context and additional knowledge on this subject, I am honored to introduce to you this morning Dr. Seth Riley, who will provide an overview of wildlife corridors and conservation efforts in Southern California. Dr. Riley is a wildlife ecologist with the National Park Service, wildlife branch chief at the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area, and adjunct associate professor in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at UCLA. Dr. Riley is widely published on the relationship between urban development, habitat fragmentation, and predator survival. To name just one, Dr. Riley recently published an article in the Journal of Biological Conservation entitled Survival and Competing Mortality Risks of Mountain Lions in a Major Metropolitan Area. So with that, I would like to thank Dr. Riley for joining us and sharing his expertise. And I'll now turn the floor over to Dr. Riley. Thank you.
So can everyone hear me?
Yes, Seth, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, but I'm not sure. Have I been admitted? So I'm not sure if I can.
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Right. So I don't see how to share my screen.
Okay. If Roxana could, is she working on that?
We're gonna work on it. So Seth, I'm assuming that on wherever your location is, you have you've enabled video.
It still shows him as under attendees with just talking permission.
Well, we can fix that. Done. Thank you, Commissioner Crossway.
Thank you. You're on the ball this morning. Thank you.
So Seth, we've let's see here.
Oh, wait, let me start my video. Okay. All right, so should I go ahead and share screen?
There you are. Yep, we got you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Darren and everyone for having me this morning. And as Amanda was saying, I'm going to talk about what we've learned about the importance of connectivity for wildlife over the last 25 years, and then talk a little bit specifically about connectivity along 101 in Ventura County. So as you all know, there's an amazing amount of natural area remaining in LA and Ventura counties, the Santa Monica Mountains, the Simi Hills, the Santa Susana Mountains. But we also have a huge amount of development, and we have lots of roads, freeways like 101, 23, 118, et cetera, and lots of other roads as well. And so those things can have significant effects on wildlife. So one effect certainly is that animals can get hit and killed on roads. So we've been studying bobcats since 1996. We've studied coyotes also since 96 for about 20 years. And vehicles are the #1 cause of mortality for coyotes and a significant cause of mortality for bobcats as well. And they're a cause of mortality for mountain lions, including on roads like freeways like 118 here, but also on smaller roads like this is Malibu Canyon Road down near Pepperdine. And overall, we've documented 22 different mountain lions that have been hit and killed on roads during the course of our study, since started in 2002, actually. Just one I want to mention here. Well, so like I said, some are on freeways and then others on roads like Malibu Canyon and Canaan. This is actually one right in the Conejo Grade area, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, that was actually earlier this year. But more than mortality, the big effects of roads and development are as a barrier to wildlife movement. So these are home ranges for coyotes over the first 5 or 6 years of our study. And you can see this is over multiple years, lots of different coyotes, one side of the freeway or the other. This is in the Agoura Hills area. And often the freeway is actually represents a boundary for the home range. We see a similar thing. This is number of home ranges for bobcats, again, in that same area, one side or the other. And then this is some more recent data, many hundreds of points from a GPS collar for bobcats along 101 here in the Calabasas area, but never across Las Virgenes. So we know that freeways are a major barrier to movement for bobcats, for coyotes, and then for sure for mountain lions as well. So this is thousands of GPS locations from our mountain lion study over many years here in the Santa Monicas. But then if you zoom in, and again, we'll talk more about this area later, but here we are in the Conejo Grade, the west end of the Santa Monicas, lots of mountain lions up to the freeway, but very rarely or almost never across. Here in the central Santa Monica is the same thing, up close to the freeway, but almost never across. And in the east end, in the San Fernando Valley, it's hard for them to even get close to the freeway because of the development there. We see the same thing along 405, lots of mountain lions coming right up to the freeway, but not getting across. And then the same thing, this is in the eastern Santa Susanas, actually, with a bunch of mountain lions right up against 5. And actually, we've never had a lion successfully cross 5, at least one that we've been tracking. So the freeways are major barriers, but even smaller roads we've seen as significant barriers as well. So this is a study we did with Caltrans along Highway 118, where it's not a freeway between Moore Park and Ventura. There's a coyote that was hit and killed on this road. And as you all know, I'm sure it's just 2 lanes, not as much traffic as some of these other major roads, but it still is a significant barrier. So these are GPS points for a number of bobcats we followed as part of this study. And you can see they're all mostly on one side of 118 or on the other. The one place where they crossed a whole bunch back and forth here is right here, and that's at Mexico Creek, where there was this nice underpass. There's a mother bobcat and her kitten easily crossing underneath there. So even smaller roads like 118 can be significant barriers. But on top of being a barrier to movement, the maybe even bigger issue is if these roads become barriers to gene flow. And so if the barrier to movement is significant enough, that can happen. And we've seen that in a number of species as well. So this is data from work we did on the genetics of coyotes. These numbers are FST values, which are a measure of genetic differentiation. And you can see about 0.04 for FST across the freeway here, about 10 times as much across the freeway as there is along the freeway. We saw something similar in bobcats, significant differentiation across 101, similar level, about 0.05, and then an even greater level across 405. And then we've seen this same thing of significant genetic differentiation, even for smaller, very widespread species. So here we have 3 different lizards, fence lizards, side blotch lizards, and skinks, and then wren tits, very common bird. You would think that birds can fly, they shouldn't be affected by roads and development, but all of these species actually, we see significant genetic differentiation relative to urbanization. So this is, I'll just mention this figure here. This is a figure using the program structure where you put all the genetic data into the program and you ask it how many different genetic clusters there are. And so in this case for skinks, there's 5 different clusters represented by these different colors. And here you can see here's 23 and 101 in the Thousand Oaks area. We have different genetic clusters in different habitat fragments over here, Botanic Gardens and Fireworks. And then here on the other side of 23, we have these other different clusters. And so significant differentiation related to urbanization and fragmentation. And actually the greatest amount of genetic differentiation is across the oldest and widest area here in Thousand Oaks that includes 23. And that was the case for all 4 of those species. So again, significant genetic divergence. It was related to this fragmentation and the presence of roads like 23. We also saw decreased genetic variability, and we saw the similar pattern for all 4 species. One of them is actually a bird, even though they're very different. So it really shows this strong pattern of fragmentation. But really, maybe the most significant issue genetically is with mountain lions. So this is work we've been doing with the University of Wyoming and with UCLA. And we have significantly reduced genetic diversity south of 101. So here, the FST value, remember it was 0.04 for coyotes and 0.05 for bobcats. It's 0.12 in our studies with mountain lions. These are 3 different measures of genetic diversity. And you can see they're all quite a bit higher north of 101 than south. And most significantly, the Santa Monicas south of 101 had lower genetic diversity than all other populations in California, similar actually to the Santa Anas, which are also isolated down in Orange County, and lower than all other populations measured throughout the West, actually. And the only population where genetic diversity was lower was in endangered Florida panthers, which I'll talk about a little bit more, which almost went extinct in the mid-90s because of genetic issues, inbreeding depression, and even genetic defects. So here you can see that same kind of figure for the mountain lions, and again, strong genetic differentiation. So this green cluster is in the Santa Monicas, this blue cluster is north of 101, and then actually we see significant differences across 5 as well. This red cluster is east of 5, so red over here, blue north of 101, and green in the Santa Monicas. And I just want to mention, actually, this is some work that we were involved with, again, with folks at University of Wyoming and other places, we also see this same kind of pattern across the whole state of California. So this is population genetics for mountain lions in California and Nevada. And you can see the entire state of Nevada is one cluster. And then we have 10 different genetic clusters in California. Some of those are related to geographic features like the Sierras, Western Sierras versus Eastern versus the Coast Range. But a lot of it is also related to urbanization and development. So here's our population here, and it's very different again across 5 from the San Gabriels and San Bernardinos, which are very different from the Santa Anas, which are different from even farther south. So this kind of effect of lack of connectivity we see across the state as well. And then a couple other things that we're seeing with the mountain lions, because the mountain lions are not able to regularly get back and forth across 101, normally in mountain lions, all the young males disperse to find their own home range and half of the young females disperse. And so when that's not happening, we're seeing more of a couple of different kinds of interactions between animals that are not good. One is we see a lot of interactions where male mountain lions in particular will kill other mountain lions, usually other males, but in a couple cases, even other females. And that's a significant source of mortality in our population. And again, we think because they're hemmed in and can't disperse, that's more likely than more common than it otherwise would be. And then the other thing we see is mating interactions between close relatives, again, because animals aren't able to disperse in and out. So for example, this litter of kittens here, 17, 18, and 19, the parents were P12 and P13, but then P12 mated with P19, his daughter, and had 23 and 24, but then he mated with P23, his granddaughter, a couple of times actually. And so for all 4 of these kittens here, P12 is the father and the grandfather and the great-grandfather. And they don't know that. We don't think. They're just out there trying to mate with whoever they can. But obviously that kind of thing is also bad for genetic diversity in the long run. And then a very recent development that I definitely wanted to mention, something that we had hoped not to potentially see yet, but in March of this year, we captured a young male P81, and a couple of things were going on. He was generally healthy, but he had this kink at the end of his tail here. You can see the tail turns up by almost 90 degrees, and he had only one descended testicle, one of the 2. And these are exactly the same kinds of genetic defects, or what they were assuming were genetic defects that were widespread in Florida panthers when they were on the verge of extinction. They had 90% of them had kink tails, and about 2/3 of the males were cryptorchid, which means one or both testes are undescended. So we saw that with P81, and then Jeff Sikich, our biologist who oversees the Lion Project, he saw that he could see this in a photo. This is a photo of P81 just before we caught him. So he was looking at other photos, and actually just 2 days later at that same location in the Western Santa Monicas, we saw another male uncollared with this kink here. And then he looked back at some photos from some other areas, and we saw a kink actually in this male in the Eastern Santa Monicas over east of 405. And that picture actually is from 2 years earlier. So we actually have males, these 2 in the Western Santa Monicas, but another one east of 405 that are starting to show these potential genetic defects. And then just one thing I wanted to mention quickly, obviously the Woolsey fire had a huge impact on the Santa Monica Mountains, 96,000 acres, the biggest fire to affect the Santa Monicas by a factor of almost 3. And we think, here, this is a year after the fire, this is male mountain lions, and you can see they're basically not using the burned area still. And we think, so here you have 3 different males that are jammed into the eastern end of the Santa Monicas, and so that could exacerbate these social interactions. So freeways and roads are a source of mortality. They're a significant barrier to movement, large ones, but even small ones. They can cause genetic differentiation across a whole bunch of different species, from mountain lions to birds to lizards. You get this habitat fragmentation with these small populations, and then we got low genetic diversity, and now we're even seeing some potential genetic defects, at least in the mountain lions. But there are still connections that do occur for wildlife. So I want to just talk a little bit about a few cases where they do occur, and then what we might do to increase them. This is actually from a study that we did about 20 years ago with a graduate student at Cal State Northridge, but it has a really simple, but I think important message. She studied 14 different crossing points along 101, 23, 118 here, and raccoons used every single crossing point, no matter what the landscape was like, But for species like bobcats and coyotes, the most important factor in terms of whether they used the crossing point was whether there was natural habitat on both sides, like at Alamos Canyon here and in the Rocky Peak area here. And so you can build all the crossings you want, but it is critical to pay attention to where is their natural habitat remaining, especially on both sides of a road. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. And this is that Rocky Peak area. We also have seen use of that area by mountain lions. Unfortunately, we've had some mortality in this area as well, but we had a couple animals early in the study that crossed here regularly. And they probably, this young male P3 there, you can see him with the collar going through the Corriganville Tunnel there, a hiker equestrian tunnel. So that is good because there you have natural habitat and you have a decent crossing point. And this is what it should look like with mountain lion populations when you do have good connectivity. This is a young male in the eastern Santa Susanas. He dispersed out along 126 and the Santa Clara way up here by Mount Pinos and then settled in a home range in Los Padres. So that's what you would expect to have, hopefully, if you do have good connectivity, but obviously in the Santa Monica's and Simi Hills, it's much more of a challenge. We did have one young male in early 2009, P12, was able to cross 101, actually right here in the Liberty Canyon area, which was exciting, A, because he crossed, but B, because he then survived and mated. So now we go back to these genetic clusters here, again, the green one in the Santa Monica's and the red one north of 101. This is P12. You can see he's strongly in this blue cluster, and he mated with P13 in the green cluster. And so their offspring are here, and you can see they're a nice mix between the green cluster and the blue cluster, although for 23 and 24 here, P12 is the father and the grandfather, and so you can see they're 3/4 in that blue cluster. So he brought new genetic material into the population, which was a good thing. And we've actually seen that you don't need a huge amount of movement to make a big difference, at least genetically. This is some work we did with a colleague at UCLA where he modeled genetic diversity, specifically heterozygosity, over the next 50 years under another number of different scenarios. So he looked at no immigration, and you can see with no immigration, genetic diversity continues to decline over that time. And then this is the current level, say 1 per 12 years, like with P12, and it declines a little less. But if you increase it to 1 every 4 years or even 1 every 2 years, so it's not a huge amount, it can make a big difference and keep genetic diversity from declining as much. And importantly, keeping it from getting as low as what they were seeing in Florida when they were having those really serious inbreeding issues, which was that red line there. So I just want to finally talk briefly about what can we do and what are we trying to do in terms of maintaining or increasing connectivity. We've actually done a number of different projects together with Caltrans on a number of different roads, 23, 405, 118, 126, 101 also, and then Sepulveda Boulevard. And the goal for all these projects is to evaluate the impacts of the roads on wildlife and ideally mitigate them where we can. These are some of those places where we've done those projects. Again, 126, 118, 23, 101, and 405. I don't have time to say too much about them, but I just want to say a couple of highlights. This is from I'll talk about our very first one and our very most recent one, but this is for Highway 23. When it was expanded, there were a couple of culverts that were just completely filled in, and they cleared those culverts out. So this is before and after and before and after, and it had a huge effect. So we had 2 to 3 times more use in those cleared culverts after mitigation, a pretty simple thing, but very effective. And this is part of that 118 study. So we did an initial study and we studied a bunch of different crossing points along 118, 7 different crossing points. But of course, these were not built for wildlife. They were built to move water. So you have things like this is Long Canyon here, where there's this 10-foot drop structure here. But more recently, Caltrans, here's a bobcat looking down and, maybe thinking about how this is not great for connectivity here. But Caltrans got another grant after that study to look at doing some of the things that we recommended with federal highways. And so here's Long Canyon, that same spot, just a very simple little cement ramp here, but hugely effective. There's a family of 5 raccoons. This coyote used it at around the same time of day at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, twice in 3 days. And then we have a number of other species here, skunks and bobcats and the raccoon family again. So something pretty simple, but these animals are pretty smart and they're trying to get around and they will find these things. you probably know that a major thing that we've been working on with Caltrans and National Wildlife Federation and many other partners is trying to get a wildlife overpass in the central Santa Monica Mountains in the Liberty Canyon area. This is famous wildlife crossings in Banff National Park. And then here's another example in Germany where they've done lots of these things in Europe and other parts of the world. You can see though, only 3 lanes here and 4 lanes here and no cars on these roads. So it's a very different situation than what we're facing in our area. So we're actually proposing to put this crossing over 10 lanes of roadway, 8 lanes of traffic, which as far as we know would be the biggest road that anyone would try to do this. Has anyone ever tried to do this on? And in an urban area, again, we don't know of any of these kinds of things that have been in such a large urban area. LA is the 2nd largest in the US and one of the largest in the world. So now I want to just come back a little bit and talk about 101 in Ventura County. So this is actually the linkage map, which was done in the sort of mid around 2005 or so. And it actually formed the basis for the groundbreaking Ventura County ordinance that's protecting connectivity. And these points are different places where mountain lions have crossed roads, and you can see they overwhelmingly fall exactly in the places where the linkage was mapped. But I want to mention, so there's a number of them here at Liberty Canyon, as I mentioned, and then in that area, but also the other place we've had 3 crossings, and actually 4 now as of more recently, is right here in the Conejo Grade. And you can see that's another place where the linkage crosses 101 there. And so this actually, so we had 3 in the last few years, and then we had another one just this year right here. And we don't know for sure exactly where he crossed. This is P78. This was his last point south of the freeway, and this is the next one north. But it looks like he crossed towards the top of the grade in the area of the way station. A couple of other areas that I think are interesting to think about for connectivity in this area. So this is Conejo Creek, which goes under the freeway here, and then Callegas Creek over here. And so we don't know a lot about those. This is what Callegas Creek looks like going under the freeway. A nice crossing there, certainly, but there are some things going on like this. So just a little bit south, you have this big drop structure, not straight up and down like the one in Long Canyon, but still not great for wildlife movement. And also you just don't have much in the way of vegetation or habitat that would make it hospitable for wildlife to move. This is actually a P8, a young mountain lion early in the study that dispersed out into the agricultural areas here, went up along Callegas Creek, but did not cross, and then turned around and came back. And then this is what Conejo Creek looks like going under the freeway here. Again, in terms of the crossing, it's pretty good, but not great in terms of sort of cover and habitat. And these are a couple different mountain lions we've followed in the western Santa Monicas in recent years. And you can see this guy also went over into Callegas Creek and was right close to the freeway, but didn't cross. And then we have a number of points in Conejo Creek along here for both of these animals, but none of them were in this last little stretch before 101, and neither of them have gone up to the freeway or crossed the freeway in that area. So just to sort of wrap up a little bit about 101 and the Conejo Grade, I think between 23 and 33, certainly the Conejo Grade is the most critical area for wildlife connectivity. That's where, again, where you have natural habitat on both sides, which is critical. I think it'd be really valuable to potentially learn more about the use of Callegas Creek and Conejo Creek. We've not had a chance ever to study them. Be interesting to know what's going on more, have some cameras or something like that. And then, of course, it would be great to add some kind of crossing structure between the Santa Monicas and areas to the north in this area as well. You know, we're pushing hard to make this one happen in Liberty Canyon, but the truth is we hope that's just the beginning, both in our area and across the state and really across the country. So that's it. Thank you.
Wonderful. This was a very, very interesting presentation. And I'm sure there are questions from my fellow commissioners. Dr. Riley, who would like to go first? Commissioner Long, and then followed by Commissioner Simons.
Hi, Dr. Riley. Thank you so much for this great presentation. I know the Board of Supervisors has been really working hard in wildlife corridors. My office, I know, worked with Caltrans to understand how do we upgrade the passes for the freeways, because we were talking about how most of them can't cross, and that's what the big deal is. So I'm glad to hear that you've seen a lot of improvement. And so the question to me would be, how can we assist anymore to make sure that we do improve those crossways so that the animals can go safety, not only for the animals, but for the people. We have to work together on this. So especially like on the 118 and there's the 101 and so forth. So anything you can suggest for us, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure, yeah, I mean, and it really depends a lot on the particular situation. Like those spots that I was showing on 118, it's a relatively simple fix, just adding those ramps, and we're still monitoring that, but it's been really effective. It's pretty exciting actually, just to see like a simple thing like that and the difference that it makes. But that's a relatively small road, and so some of those things are sort of more suitable. I mean, in places like Cayugas Creek and Caneo Creek, it'd be interesting to learn more about what's going on there. You have a balance, of course, between flood control and those kinds of things, and then making it suitable for wildlife. But it'd be great to have a little bit more cover in those places so that wildlife could feel safely going back and forth. One issue with Cayugas Creek, I didn't mention, but north of the freeway, for a long time, it's pretty tight through the development there. And so that may be one of the reasons why, animals are less willing to go through there. So.
And then we also have the 126 where there's not barriers to cross the road. And I know we've met with Caltrans on that. It's always funding is a question, if we're working on a road, when would we do the wildlife corridors versus the fixing of the roads and so forth. So it's a combination, I think.
Yeah, no, and that's absolutely right. It's much easier if there's a road project happening to potentially do something, because then you potentially have some mitigation dollars. And that's part of the challenge, like with the crossing at Liberty Canyon, we've had to fund that essentially through private foundations, through National Wildlife Federation, through some grants and things, because there hasn't been a project. But that's why, it seems like maybe there's some opportunities here with this project in Ventura County, where there is a road project. Maybe there's some things that could be done. So,
Commissioner Simons.
Oh, thank you. First of all, go Bruins. I thought your presentation was fascinating. Has there been any studies from a cost perspective of overground versus underground access? Has Caltrans been involved with any of those things?
Yes, yes, for the Caltrans is hugely involved with sort of anything that we do with roads, for sure. And yeah, I think, so we actually looked into tunnels. So we've actually been working on that spot for 20 years at least, trying to get something, in the Liberty Canyon area. And we, for example, we had worked on potentially doing a tunnel in the past. We actually applied for a transportation enhancement grant back in 2010, which we came very close to getting. And then at the last moment, Northern California swooped in. Anyway, but it was, the issue there is that, so there's only and actually Caltrans folks would know more about this than me certainly, but there's only so big a tunnel that you can push through under a freeway. It's called tunnel jacking, is my understanding. And so this is what the Federal Highways folks that helped us out with this and gave us some cost estimates. The biggest tunnel that they could put through there was 13 by 13. Otherwise, you'd have to do what's called cut and cover, where you close down the freeway for some significant period of time, which we just, figure is just not a possibility. And so, a tunnel is certainly better, better than nothing, for example, in the Liberty Canyon area, but a 13 by 13 foot tunnel going under 300 feet there would just not be suitable for a lot of species. Like, for example, deer are much less willing to go through long, dark tunnels than other species. And so that's one reason why we're really focused on having an overpass in the Liberty Canyon area, is because we can make it wide and we can vegetate it and we can make it effective for the whole wildlife community. I mean, the mountain lions get the most attention, and they are certainly, I would say, the species that's most at risk. But really, we're trying to connect these natural areas for everything, you know, not just for the mountain lions. So, but yes, in general, I mean, again, my expertise is not on the cost side or the construction side, but it was going to be less to put in a tunnel, except that if you wanted to put in a big enough tunnel to accommodate everything, it might have even been more cost, if you understand, because we had to do the cut and cover, you know, and that kind of thing. So there's sort of various factors that come into play. Yeah.
And I've got a couple more questions, and I apologize.
Yeah.
Do you have an inventory of the assets in Ventura County that are available that have existing tunnels or thoroughfares that go through the freeways? Do you currently have a copy of that? And have you prioritized that and made some suggestions to the local jurisdictions as to where we want to start?
No, actually, we don't. I wouldn't say we have done a sort of comprehensive across the whole county look. I mean, we certainly worked closely with the county when they were working on the connectivity ordinance, and together with Caltrans. I would say Caltrans, I think, has a good idea of where different potential crossing points are throughout the county, but we have not done, not that it wouldn't be a good idea, but we have not done a comprehensive look at everything across the county, but it would potentially be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a couple more questions here, and I apologize.
Oh, that's good.
First of all, I thought it was really cool some of the simple solutions that you came up with. Again, if we had an inventory of the assets, maybe we could go ahead and look at some simple solutions to make them more accessible. That's what I was trying to get to.
Yeah.
In respect to those type of solutions, has there been a paper put together to where when our local jurisdictions are evaluating some of these facilities that we're doing in our own designs, that we could have access to, so we can give them to our planning departments to maybe help expedite some of these factors in relationship to our local jurisdictions, where we have more control, as many of us would just represent the cities and not the county. And my last question, and you can answer this one at the same time, has there, when you access areas that are not currently accessed by mountain lions, are there any things we should be aware of or concerns when they repopulate into areas that are near residential areas that we need to notify our citizens of?
Yeah, so the answer to your first question is we have not written up, for example, that 118 study yet, because we're still doing the monitoring, but we definitely will. And yes, we can certainly make that available. I mean, it'll be a report to Caltrans because it's a project with them, but then we can certainly make that available, or they can to everyone. So, and then I would say in terms of the mountain lions, there aren't really places where there's suitable mountain lion habitat that they aren't already in general. You know, they're basically where there's decent habitat, where there's deer, they're getting to those places. It's more that they're not able to get between those places very effectively, if that makes sense. So it's not like when we make these crossings or when we make these connections, they're going to be in a bunch of places that they weren't before. It's just that they're going to be able to more effectively get back and forth between them, if that makes sense. So yeah, so I think basically where there's good habitat for all kinds of wildlife species, including mountain lions, you generally have them already. So.
Thank you. We do have a question from Commissioner Edmonds, and who will be after Commissioner Edmonds? Commissioner Haney, and after Commissioner Haney, Commissioner Huber. Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Edmonds.
I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
I live in Fillmore, and I live directly across the street from Los Padres National Park. And we have a natural place coming down Pole Creek. My son used to run up Pole Creek, and he passed a bear every day and waved as he went by. But what we find is that animals are coming from Los Padres, particularly after fires, like the Thomas Fire burned to Fillmore, and it pushed all of the animals into our area, and it made a heavy concentration. And we have starving coyotes, starving particularly mountain lions, and also bear, who smell the fish hatchery, which is on the other side of the freeway. and they wander through town, usually at night. Sometimes they sleep on my front lawn, and they just keep going down, but they often are, particularly bears, get killed on the highway more than other animals. Yeah, have you looked at ways to help? Because we have so many places they could be crossing, and they just seem to go down Pole Creek and then through the town.
And that's an area where they seem to be getting hit, you think, as well? Or?
Yeah, they get hit on the way to the fish hatchery.
Yeah.
They can smell the fish.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I didn't sort of talk about this too much, but there's sort of a balance. So when roads are really big and have a ton of traffic on them, like 101, mostly the animals just don't even try to cross them. But 126 is less of a barrier. So as you're saying, animals more often are getting back and forth across 126. And we actually did, one of the studies we did with Caltrans was along 126. There are many different crossing points there, but we see some interesting differences between species. So for example, the bobcats almost always used the various underpasses and tunnels to go under 126, whereas the coyotes seem to cross over quite a bit, and we had a lot more roadkill in the coyotes than we did in the bobcats. But yeah, it'd be, there's certainly plenty that could be done along 126 too, in terms of looking in more detail at some of those crossings. And when you have a road like that that's not quite as busy, then you tend to get more mortality on it, as it sounds like you're seeing. So I'm not familiar with the Polk one exactly, so it'd be interesting to check that out. Yeah,
I'd love to have you look at it in more detail. I'm sure money is and time is of an issue, but
yeah,
it'd be really important.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to Commissioner, let's see, it was Commissioner Haney. And I know we also have Commissioners Parks and Tremblay as well.
And me.
Commissioner Haney? No, I do. Commissioner Haney, can you hear us? Okay, he may not be able to hear us, so let's go to Commissioner White then in the meantime.
Commissioner White, you're still muted. Commissioner White, you're muted.
There we go. Okay, that's better. I just really amazed at the information that has been gathered about the animals throughout Ventura County. And I just want to thank him for putting this presentation together. That's all. Thank you very much.
Oh, of course. Thank you.
Chair, I'm not sure if you can hear me now.
Now we can. Go ahead, Commissioner Haney.
Just first of all, Dr. Riley, a great presentation. And I know that trying to get all of the animals from one side to the other side is probably the best goal. But if we're just talking mountain lions, is there any thoughts on tranquilizing or capturing and then relocating to populate those other areas that they can't seem to get to?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question, and one that we get a lot. And what I say is that, that's not our first choice. Our goal is to try to make it happen naturally by making these connections possible. And our goal is, like I said, the goal is not just the mountain lions; it's connecting it for everything. But if it's 10 years from now and we're continuing to see genetic diversity decline, and especially if we're continuing to see these kinds of potential genetic defects, if it was up to me, and it won't be just up to me, but I think we would definitely want to consider that. I mean, it's also not great because when you move animals around, they often don't do very well. They fight with others and they get in conflicts, and often they don't survive. But it definitely worked in Florida. So what happened in Florida was, and it was a big controversial deal deciding whether to do it or not, but they brought in 8 females from Texas, and 5 of those females bred, and it totally turned that population around. So I would say, our goal is not to have to do that because it's costly. You'd have to keep doing it sort of over and over again, you know what I mean? As opposed to making connections that would last forever. But I definitely think it's something that we would want to consider. They've done that recently at Isle Royale National Park, actually with the wolves, where they had various serious genetic issues. So, I think we would consider that in the long run, if we're continuing to have these issues, if we are not able to increase connectivity in ways that are effective.
Yeah, I would just think, being cost effective, building an overpass over a freeway, I can't imagine is cheap. And going and tunneling under a freeway can't necessarily be inexpensive. So
yeah,
that was just a thought. I think most of the men sitting on this panel are all trying to figure out how to solve your problem.
Yeah.
But we won't. And thank you for your time.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to Commissioner Huber. I believe you wanted to make a comment as well.
Well, I just very appreciative of this excellent and thorough presentation. It was very enlightening. Just want to say thank you.
Oh, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Tremblay, and then Commissioner Parks.
Thank you. And I also want to thank Darren for bringing Seth to us this morning. Great report as always, Dr. Riley. And could you, the one mountain line that crossed near the scales on the 101 at the top of the grade, do you know how it crossed? Did it go across the actual lanes of traffic?
Yeah, well, so actually it's been 4. I mean, there was one recently, but there been 3 before that. And we're pretty darn sure that all 4 of them crossed over the freeway itself, because we think, again, we don't know exactly where they crossed because it's 2 hours between the points, right? So we don't know for sure. But 3 of them actually crossed up pretty high on the grade towards the scales. And as far as we know, and let me know if anyone knows something different, but as far as we know, there are no underpasses or anything in that area. So we're pretty sure that they had to go over the top of the road. And then there was a young female, P33, who crossed more down kind of in the middle of the grade. And there is an old cattle crossing there, but we looked pretty carefully the next day for any tracks. And it didn't really make sense with where her points were either. So we're pretty sure that the 4 crossings that we know of for the Conejo grade all went over the road itself. And certainly there's less traffic. I mean, it's a busy road, but it's not quite as busy there as it is, say, in Calabasas and Agoura Hills, and at 2 in.the morning, which is when all these crossings happened in the middle of the night. That's certainly less traffic than there is at other times. So
I think we lost one.
As far as we know, those were all over the road. Yeah.
I think one got killed there too. Isn't that right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So just this past March, I believe it was, there was an animal, a young male, that was killed. Again, not all that far, maybe 300 meters west of the top of the grade there of the way station. Yeah.
Well, I just, someone asked about Caltrans, and I have just been so impressed with Caltrans. It's nice to see we have our interim superintendent here today. But what a wonderful project that they're doing over there at Liberty Canyon, getting a lot of momentum. And fortunately, the National Wildlife Federation stepping up big for those private dollars, as well as the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy that I sit on, and others have stepped up big time. And I know they are hoping to have that actually get going in the next year. So that would be very exciting. A lot more money to gather for that. But you made a good point that it's a lot less expensive to do it when you're already doing a widening project. And that's what we will be doing on the 101 freeway there. So the idea that you can use mitigation monies that the environmental impact report will probably identify, that's the best you can do. But also just the vision, you think about the one at Liberty Canyon, is kind of the gateway into Ventura County, and just what a remarkable statement that makes, I think, for our society, and also for tourist dollars too, potentially. And so I just want to end with a trivia question for you, Seth. Do you know what which mountain lion's in the photo behind me?
Oh yeah, look at that. That looks like from maybe the first litter. Is that right? Which is it? No.
You tell me.
Oh, you don't? I'm not sure. I'm afraid I'm not that great at telling the mountain lion kittens apart, or even the mountain lions, actually.
Thank you so much. And also the National Park Service was a great partner in our wildlife corridor zone that we put together in Ventura County, and first in the nation. And thank you so much. It's all that wonderful study research that you have done that really helped us lock that in and make it a completely scientific designation, and very much appreciate the collaboration, Caltrans, VCTC, National Park Service, and of course, wonderful to see the private funding too with the National Wildlife Federation. Thank you.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Commissioner Tremblay.
Hi, Dr. Riley. I'm Tony Tremblay from Camarillo. Thank you for a really excellent presentation. I was intrigued particularly by your slides on the mountain lion traversing near Camarillo Springs, both near Callegas Creek and Caneo Creek at the bottom of Caneo Grade. And so I want to ask you kind of a macro question, which calls for sort of an answer in the narrative. But if you were to design and proceed with a study showing the status of those crossings and the improvements, in other words, cameras, timeline, cost, and the lead up time, to show whether or not those crossings could be utilized, what would that look like? The reason I'm asking is what if you were able to do it, what would be your next step in the study process for those two crossings, recognizing, of course, that from a habitat standpoint and from a study protocol standpoint, they're very different crossings, Caneo versus Callegas. But I would just be curious to know what you would do, because that would take, I think, an effort by Caltrans, the Flood Protection District, perhaps the city, and private landowners. So I'm really curious how you would design that.
Yeah, I mean, well, the first thing that we would do is just gather more data, more monitoring data, as you said, and specifically put cameras in. I mean, it's a little bit, because they're so wide, you're not going to catch every single, you're not going to, cover every square foot under there, but you could definitely do a good job of getting an idea of whether animals are using both places. And like I said, so far, at least with the mountain lions, we have not had indication that they are, at least the ones that we've been tracking. But it'd be nice to track other kinds of species in there. So when we do these projects together with Caltrans, typically we put GPS collars on a few different species. So bobcats, coyotes, mountain lions, maybe deer. And so you get an idea of different species and how they're using the landscape right near the road there, and then whether or not they're actually crossing. With the cameras, we typically put cameras under the crossing itself, and then we put cameras nearby, right? So we have an idea of like, here are the species that are in the vicinity of the crossing, and then here's which ones actually use the crossing. So like, for example, along the 126, we studied 13 different crossing points there, and then we had cameras north and south to see, okay, here's the animals that are nearby, and then here's the ones that are actually crossing. And then it would, we would gather that data, and then we would look at, what do those look like? I mean, I think just from looking at them visually, I think part of the issue is just not a lot of cover. The bigger issue, as I was saying, say potentially for Callegas Creek in particular, is that south of the freeway, it's basically through a lot of ag land, and then north of the freeway, it's a nice stream corridor, but it's pretty tight through Camarillo there. I mean, you know better than me, certainly. And so it might be something where an animal, once they're in it, they're just going to have to travel it and stay in it for a long time, and they won't be just as willing to do so as if it opened immediately into natural area, if that makes sense. So, we've seen something. So the Santa Clara, where the Santa Clara goes under 5, for a long time, we had a few mountain lions that would occasionally go under, but then they would turn around and come back, because the Santa Clara also kind of goes through Santa Clarita, east of 5 there. We did have a young male, actually that same young male that recently crossed 101 that I showed the points of. He actually went through there and went way up into Angeles, although now he's come back and he seems to like that area right around Six Flags there. So, you know, so I think part of it is what's the crossing like itself, but then part of it is what is the landscape like, you know, to the north and south, if that makes sense. So, but we would, if we were to do a study or maybe together with Caltrans, you know, we'd gather those data and then we would potentially make some, you know, recommendations like you're saying about here's ways that those crossings, you know, might be better.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate the thoughtful answer to the question. I was just particularly struck by the slide that you showed relative to the mountain lion, who on at least I think it looked like multiple occasions went up to immediately to the south on the Canal Creek side, and then came back.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that was Cayugas. Yeah.
Oh, was that Cayugas? I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Yeah. But made that, for whatever reason, made that determination not to do that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
One other question, if I may, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
From a speciation standpoint, if you see that coyotes or other species are crossing, is that an indicator for more of a propensity for the mountain lions to cross? In other words, is there any correlation between the species that are, you know, if you see a lot of coyotes crossing, for example, would that mean that mountain lions would be more amenable to crossing? It's not the right word, but you know what I mean.
Right. Sure. Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah. And I'd say the answer is yes and no. So yes, if you have decent ways for animals to get across, then you're going to have multiple species using that. But you do have some differences between species too. So as I was saying, like along 126, the coyotes seem to go over the road much more and the bobcats, you know, seem to use the underpass. So you do have species specific differences, and it can depend on what that particular structure is like. So for example, as I was saying, if you have a long dark tunnel, things like deer are typically not willing to go through those. But mountain lions are more willing to go through tunnels, for example, carnivores in general. I didn't have time to talk about it, but we had a tunnel in the Liberty Canyon area that actually is really long and bends in the middle. And so you can't even see light through it. And so it's not very effective, unfortunately, for wildlife. We're basically getting almost nothing except a couple of raccoons and skunks that are pretty, you know, used to going through dark places. But we had one mountain lion that one time did it somehow. And then since he figured it out, he like went back and forth constantly. And so you do have, you know, individual animals that can be different as well. So in general, there's things you can do to make them valuable for as many different species as possible, but there are going to be some differences between species and even between individuals. So.
Okay, great. Dr. Riley, thank you so much. An excellent presentation. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no, okay, Commissioner.
Yes. One question, I think it's for staff. It mentioned in the staff report that there's analysis being done of wildlife crossings and potential impacts to wildlife as part of Our Future 101 project. Is that just we're looking to see what impact widening the freeway would have, or are we actually looking at how the project could be designed to decrease those impacts on wildlife crossing?
Thank you, Commissioner Crosswhite. The answer is yes to both. It's so the first part is we're doing, and we've been actually working with Dr. Riley and a number of other biologists and those that study this with our own team, the consulting team that's looking at this. So there's a lot of work that's going in to identify what the issues are. That's the first step, and to determine what the appropriate mitigations are. As Dr. Riley indicated, one of the times to look at these types of projects is when it's associated with another major project. And so that is they are going, the part of the environmental document that will ultimately, is actually ultimately approved by Caltrans, will, based on all of this analysis, come up with suggestions as to the appropriate mitigations. And in that case, then the project can help pay for those mitigations. And as Seth mentioned, there's a bunch of different options that can be looked at. Sometimes it's a bridge, sometimes it's a tunnel. As Seth mentioned, there's this concept of tunneling called cut and cover. That is an option that could be looked at. So there's all sorts of opportunities. And in this case, the the consultants are looking at all of those and will come back with some final recommendations.
Good, thank you. I do have a couple of questions. I know Commissioner Zaragoza will have to leave in a few minutes. I believe that he said 10:30. So wanted to ask a couple of quick questions. At the bottom of the Conejo Grade, Dr. Riley, we do already have some sort of natural path that is many years old, decades old. What can you tell us about that?
Sorry, which path are you?
It's at the bottom of the grade. There is a natural, well, I shouldn't say natural. It was used decades ago by probably other livestock. And is that something that can be used, that can be developed into some sort of path or crossing corridor?
So are you talking about the cattle tunnel?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Potentially. So we actually monitored that. So part of that study that I mentioned that the Northridge student did a long time ago, she did monitor that crossing. You know, it doesn't seem to be great currently because it's kind of like randomly in the middle of the hill on both sides. You know what I mean? So it's also currently on the other side of the right-of-way fence for Caltrans, at least on the south side. And so that's not ideal. I mean, one thing we've been working with Caltrans on is as many times as possible having the fencing, you know, be as close to the freeway as possible so that there's not natural habitat, you know, between the fencing and the road. But yeah, so that we haven't seen a lot of use of that crossing, but it would be interesting to monitor that one some more. It was 20 years ago that we monitored it. We didn't use cameras. Actually, we were just doing tracking on the ground at that time. So we haven't seen a lot of use of it, but it would be interesting to know. Like I said, one issue with it is often animals like to move through drainages, and they're more likely to find things that are like Conejo Creek or Callegas Creek that are at the end of a drainage. And like I said, that tunnel just happens to be sort of randomly in the middle of the hillside, you know, but there are things that can be done, like using fencing to funnel animals towards it, you know, and that kind of thing to maybe improve it. So.
Okay, well, that is something that I think could be considered when we do the overall evaluation right now with the widening. And I appreciated your sharing the pictures corridor or bridges in Europe, in Germany, and in southern Germany. There are hundreds of them, if not thousands of them. And as you say, the roads are very narrow, 2 lanes, maybe 3 lanes, and hardly any traffic. Yeah. So it is interesting that with as little traffic as there is in southern Germany, that the mindset is to protect wildlife at any cost. And so I appreciated you sharing that with us. I don't have any additional questions. I want to thank you very much.
Madam Chair, I see Commissioner Parks. Commissioner Parks.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know that I want to go quick, but just thank you so much for doing this. I know that, as is mentioned by Dr. Riley, what's optimal for the preservation of the species is a bridge. And the best time to do it is when you're already out there widening it. And it's kind of one of those, if not now, you know, it probably never will happen. So this is a kind of a one-time opportunity with the widening of the 101 that's being proposed. I do hope we will be able to consider it. I appreciate Commissioner Crosswright's question. Caltrans is actually doing the bridge and the design and the environmental impact report for the Liberty Canyon Bridge. We chose to have VCTC do it instead of Caltrans. So I'm just hoping that we do have a great model there, a lot of effort and work and research and study on how to do it. This gives us a leg up if we do move on that. And I hope that it certainly will be one of the alternatives that will be brought forward with the environmental impact report.
Thank you. And Dr. Riley, thank you for a fascinating presentation, absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure we'll be receiving an update in the near future. So good luck with everything. And with that, we will move on to item number 10. I understand Commissioner Zaragoza has already left the meeting. And that will be presented by Ms. Grasti.
Give us a moment, Madam Chair, while we change out our participants. I will say that what you've just had in about the last hour would have been a 10-week course at UCLA. So it was really, that was a fascinating conversation. So I see Ms. Grasty is now on, and so Claire, take it away.
Thank you. So good morning, commissioners. Sorry, I have to follow up such a great presentation. Might not be quite as interesting, but I still hope you guys find it interesting as well. So we're happy to be to this point now to be presenting the draft Transportation Emergency Preparedness Plan. We really want to thank all of our stakeholders who have engaged with us. We've had great participation and has really informed this draft. We've had comments on our initial draft from all of our stakeholders. So we really appreciate that. So in any feedback we get from the commission and from the SBCAG board will of course be incorporated into the final. I also want to mention that we have the draft up on the TEP website for the public to provide any sort of comments, and will remain up there through the SBCAG board meeting as well, which is happening later this month. And we hope to bring back the final in December, but potentially in the future, depending on the comments that we receive back. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our consultants. Claire's strategy, I'm going to pass it over to William Lim and also to Brent Woodward. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Can you hear me? Great. And so thank you for inviting us today. My name is William Lim, and I'm the CEO and president of Claire's Strategy. I'm the lead consultant on the Transportation Emergency Preparedness Plan. So I am going to share our deck, and if you can tell me if you can see this. And
William. Yep, we see it well.
Thank you. So I apologize, our graphics and presentation may not be as colorful as Executive Director Kettle's or Dr. Riley's presentation, but hopefully it is as interesting. And so what my firm, we focus on helping critical infrastructure organizations better prepare for emergencies. And we've worked with organizations like LA Metro, Orange County Transportation Authority, Southern California Edison, LAX, and numerous water agencies. So my role in the project is to help, is the project manager. And so I'd like to have Brent Woodward introduce himself. Brent?
Great, thank you, William. Again, thank you for this opportunity, Madam Chair, Commissioners, Claire. We sure appreciate the time you're providing us to go through with this. I've worked with William a number of years. My role is as really a subject matter expert, also author and contributor to the program itself. My experience over many years is in managing the response to around 70 major events in 50 countries. I also chair for the U.S. Congress subcommittee for the development of the mitigation study for FEMA and several other agencies. I'm also part of the National Academy of Sciences and some other groups as well. But this is really a pleasure to be working with you. We've had just an enjoyable and enlightening time as we work with all the folks within your area. So thank you.
Thank you, Brent. I'd like to also add that one of our other team members who can be here today is Wendy Milligan. Wendy is formerly led the Ventura County Sheriff's Office of Emergency Services for almost a decade, and she is the primary planner on the project. And with that, I'd like to kind of give you an overview of the agenda today with the time we have with you. We'll talk a little bit about the introduction of the project itself through the introduction. We'll go through how we have got to this point, the project process. Brent will give an overview of what the Transportation Emergency Preparedness Plan, we call it the TEP as well for short. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps, and we'll have a Q&A at the end. So introduction-wise, so what was the purpose of the project? Well, the genesis of the project was due to the many disasters, unfortunately, this region has faced with. including the Thomas Fire and the 1-9 debris flow, also known as the Montecito mudslides. So VCTC and SBCAG had the forethought to apply for a grant from Caltrans to develop an emergency preparedness plan for both Ventura and Santa Barbara counties. And so, unfortunately, it appears like these emergencies are happening more often. And so this is very timely for this. So who's the plan for? Well, ultimately, the plan is for the communities of Ventura and Santa Barbara counties. But specifically, this is an operational emergency plan that is meant to help VCTC, SBCAG, and in coordination with Ventura County Sheriff's Office of Emergency Services, or what we're going to call OES, and Santa Barbara County Office of Emergency Management, or OEM, as well as the transit agencies in both counties and cities in both counties, other transportation providers, including rail, sea, and air, and other government agencies. So it is really all the stakeholders involved in transportation, providing transportation in emergency for the communities of Ventura and Santa Barbara counties. So why is this TEP important? Well, the goals of the project is to help respond to the needs of the community sooner and more effectively. And especially important to assist in evacuations for especially the disadvantaged and vulnerable populations. As well, this will help transit agencies better communicate in an emergency and manage during a disaster. Finally, it really, the really foundation of emergency response is communication, coordination, and collaboration amongst all the responders involved. So this is meant to enhance that. So with that, then I want to talk a little bit about the project process. And so the project is divided into 5 phases. And so this is a roadmap of how we've been working through the project. We had a kickoff about 1.5 years ago, starting in July of last year. Then we went through a very extensive phase of information collection, what we call the public participation plan and the research. So we formed an advisory committee that I'll talk a little bit more about a little later. We went through a lot of interviews. We had a public participation part of the project, which I will talk about later as well. And we did some site walks. We did some extensive best practices and lessons learned research, and we reviewed a lot of documents that were available. So based with that, we went into the next phase, which was the preparation for emergency. In this phase, we dug a little deeper and we looked at who the vulnerable populations were and the vulnerable areas were. We had a series of meetings with groups in both counties to talk about that and who were responsible for that. Then we looked at things like mutual aid and mutual assistance, how transit agencies would perhaps rely on others' resources to be able to bring those to bear. Then we talked, we also researched and did a plan for training and exercises in which once the plan is complete, how do you make it sustainable? So we have a section in the plan for that. And then we have an extensive section on disaster reimbursement. So after disaster, then how can you, these transit agencies apply for reimbursement, both from the FTA and from FEMA. So with all that information, then we went into drafting the plan. And so for about 6 months, we drafted the plan and presented the first draft of the plan at the end of June, and then received a number of comments from the various groups involved. And then we have updated that and edited it. And now the current draft is what you have with you. So once we receive the comments back from both the VCTC board and SBCAG board, we'll incorporate those comments, and then the plan will be ready for adoption, as Claire was saying, perhaps in December. And then the final part of this is really something that I commend because of the forethought. Most times when we do these kind of plans, it ends here. But with VCTC and SBK's grant, it talks about how do you sustain it for the future. And so we will go into this once the plan is adopted. So I'd like to go into a little bit about how we did our information gathering. So as Claire was saying, there is a project website, the vctc.org. And that website provides information on this project to the public. And it also served as the means by which we went out and gathered information from the ridership of all the transit agencies in Ventura and Santa Barbara County. So this allowed the riding public to give us information on what their thoughts were on how better perhaps to deal with emergencies, what their needs were. So this was never intended as a scientific survey. So as part of the initial grant, it was always meant to be just a sampling that was not randomly sampled, but just a gathering information. So what we did was we put a survey onto the website, and we sent out 2,000 survey cards in Ventura County, 1,500 in Santa Barbara County to the ridership through buses and bus drivers. It was produced in English, Spanish, and Mandarin. And then as well, we had in-person interviews at 4 Ventura County transit locations. So another key part of the information gathering was we formed an advisory committee at the very beginning. And we had a lot of interest. Claire sent out invites out there to, I don't know how many, but we had 40 organizations respond and commit to this process. And what is surprising for me is that membership in these advisory committees have continued throughout. The interest has been extremely high. And we've held 3 meetings for the information gathering side, and we've held 2 workshops as we've developed the plan. As well, we've had a number of presentations and facilitated discussions with SBCAG and VCTC, with SBCAG's TTAC committee, and with Ventura County's Transcom. We've had field visits. Additionally, we went through a lot of interviews. We've had over 30 stakeholder group interviews, including OES in Ventura County, OEM in Santa Barbara County, with Gold Coast Transit, with Caltrans, with CHP, with 211, the Channel Islands, CSU Channel Islands, the County of Ventura Department of Airports, Public Health, Metrolink, Losan, and City of Thousand Oaks Transit. So from that as well, next we also did, as I mentioned previously, a lot of research. We looked at how others experienced emergencies, both locally, regionally, and across the country. So what we were looking for were best practices and lessons learned. And we interviewed both county agencies at the emergency operations level, as well as transportation agencies. And we researched and looked at how they dealt with transportation plans and evacuation plans, and importantly as well, how they communicated during these emergencies, what they had in place. We looked at the agreements currently in place, the memorandums of understandings and memorandums of agreement, and focused in on mutual aid and mutual assistance. Then we also looked at how these agencies communicated both internally, between agencies, and with their customers. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Brent, who will give you an overview on the TEP draft that is provided to you as part of the information packet. Brent?
Great. Thank you, William.
And again, I'm sorry, Brent, if I could just jump in real quick. This is Darren Kettle. I just want to be respectful of everybody's time as you transition to your segment. If you could just keep in mind, we need to try to keep the agenda moving. We do have another discussion item that's still going to take a little bit of time today. So if I could just ask you to try to move through this next segment in a little quicker fashion, if we could.
Absolutely. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you.
Let me get to the next slide, William. And I'm going to take you through a little bit about the report, and you folks do have copies of it. But the plan basically, it establishes a framework for what do you do in an emergency or disaster. So you've got an understanding within the transportation sector, what kinds of activities and responsibilities. It does define the individual roles, but the little pyramid you're seeing on the right, overall, a good plan should address each of these things. And it develops the process so that you can understand what's the best way to collaborate, to coordinate, and communicate. Bottom line, the foundation, the situational awareness that you see, that really comes about as you gather information, you turn that information into intelligence, that becomes wisdom, and you make better decisions. So all these components, when you add them up, they actually give you improved control during a time that may be high stress or somewhat chaotic. And I would just comment, I think of all these things, one of the most important one I would emphasize to all of you is to communicate. You cannot over communicate in a disaster. Telling the truth, telling it often, making sure that you share information is vital to the success of any emergency plan. Let's go to the next slide if we can. What happens as far as how is the Transportation Emergency Preparedness Plan activated? Well, following with a lot of different procedures, emergency ops centers and the incident command system, something that's both local, state, national, there are different activation levels. And there's something that's called a monitoring level. This is really when maybe something's going to happen, you're just sort of being prepared for it. And then as this situation advances, you move up to enhancing the operations to a partial and eventually a full activation. And there are a number of individuals that can declare an activation. The VCTC executive director or his or her designee can activate this. Ventura County Sheriff, the transit providers, each of them have a certain level of authority where they can say, hey, we need to activate our operation and bring it to a different level. Let's go to the next one, William. Once that is activated, one of the key roles within the plan is how do you communicate with each other? And is it two-way or is it dotted line communication? And if we get to this level, which is called like a level 2 activation within the county, you've got the transportation seat that's there, which is critical. And it has direct contact back through where you see the solid lines, the fixed route, paratransit, private transit providers, rail. And then there's dotted lines, which mean there's communication back and forth. Doesn't mean that you're directing it, but you're sharing information with the sea transport, air transport is vital. Then the county itself works with the CHP, Caltrans, Department of Transportation, military, and interfaces with the other cities. So it gives you some idea of how all these different communication components come together and information is shared. And the hub from the standpoint of TEPP is that transportation seat, which is very, very critical. So let's go to the next one, William. Between Santa Barbara and Ventura County, when there is an emergency response, one of the things that we really discovered, which was very pleasing, is the level of collaboration and cooperation between SBCAG and VCTC. And we don't think there's any real problem there in the sharing of data and working together as really two teams between both of those particular groups. We think you have done a very good job of that. And the report itself talks through those particular procedures and how that is done. But that would be one of the key components of any implementation of the plan itself. You can go ahead to the next one, William. Okay, what are the roles of VCTC and the transit agencies? At the EOC, one of the main ones I'd point out again is that there is a transportation seat filled by the VCTC staff. That is really important because the individual in that seat is really the sort of the hub for the transportation issues as they come up, providing information to the transit operators, facilitating requests, making recommendations, interfacing with all the different groups, and that's at the EOC level. Then at the VCTC offices, you'll have folks that provide support to the transit seat. So again, it's a two-way communication. And at the different agencies, there will also be information exchanged for resources as needed, communication and coordination. In each of these cases, at all three, again, those principles of collaboration, coordination, control all apply to everyone and are pretty well defined within the documentation themselves. So let's go to the next one, William. In the plan, and you folks should have a copy of it, I realize it's a couple 100+ pages of good nighttime reading for you. But I would ask you to look at a couple things in there specifically. One of them is the general concept of operations, which will really give you an idea of how everything fits together. But when it comes to roles and responsibilities, there is a list of checklists. This is something I've advocated through disasters for many years. It really simplifies the process if someone is put into a critical position during an emergency. It allows them to pull out that checklist and their standing objectives and individual responsibilities, that if you just follow that list, you'll do 80 to 90% of what's needed for that critical job or position. So downloading those checklists onto a cell phone or onto an iPad, having that component available is extremely helpful during a disaster because you're under a lot of stress and it sort of says, well, here's what you should do. So we've developed those pretty thoroughly. I think they're going to be of value. Another key value is the contact and transit inventory. This report has that. It's something that will continually be updated over time. So whoever is sitting in that key transportation hub seat knows, well, who do I call for these different requirements that I have? What agency is responsible? Again, that is in there along with reimbursement processes and then ongoing training and exercise plans for the future. So it's a really good document. I encourage you to take a look at it, but at least look at the concept of operations portion and the checklist. That should help you out. Okay, let's look at the next. I'll turn it back over actually to you, William, to keep us going here.
Thank you, Brent. So what are the next steps? Well, we're presenting the TEP draft to the SB-CAG board next, and then we'll receive whatever comments the two boards will give. So we have, as mentioned previously, we've had initial draft and we received over 250 comments for that from VCTC, from SB-CAG, from OES and OEM, and the transit agencies. And so we've incorporated that, or incorporated all those comments into this draft that you have now. As well, we've sent the draft to the advisory committee and we've received just a few comments back from them. So we'll incorporate that in the final draft. So once we receive all the comments, we'll finalize the TEP. The board can choose to adopt the TEP at that point, and then we'll go into the final phase, which is the, so how do we sustain this beyond just having a 300+ page document that may sit on the shelf. So then we also are planning what's called a mini tabletop exercise in which we gather all the folks in the advisory committee together, put a scenario out there, may it be a wildfire, may it be an earthquake, and then test the plan against that scenario, against that emergency. So we'll learn a lot from that mini tabletop exercise. Unfortunately, we've had to delay that because it's best done in person. So we're hoping to do it sometime early next year. If not in person, then we'll have to find a way to do it virtually. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions.
Thank you so much to both of you, William and Brent, for this very detailed information and super important information as well. Are there any questions from commissioners? I don't see the commissioners on the screen right now. If we could go back to the...
Yep. William, if you could stop sharing your screen.
That would be great.
Thank you.
We go.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. I didn't see any raised hands in the raised hand category. Commissioner Crosswhite.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Well, first is a comment. One reason to absolutely have everything downloaded is if there's a real emergency, you may not have internet. So if you're hoping at that point to download your documents, you may be out of luck. One question I had was, in planning and talking through all this, have we made sure that anyone who would need to be contacted has either a landline and not a VoIP phone, or what would be the backup for contacting them? Because I know during Thomas Fire, the internet went out when the power went out. And so all of the phones that weren't landlines, you couldn't use. And I know that it talked in here a little bit about some people having GETS service, but we couldn't get calls, we couldn't make calls, and I could only occasionally get texts. So I'm just curious, especially in this environment right now with a lot of people working from home, I'm just wondering if that was taken into consideration as part of this. And then I have a follow-up.
Okay. Yes. So as part of the second document, which is the recommendations technical memo, that's when we looked at what the existing conditions were. And we went through what the communications infrastructure and channels were at that point, in this point in time. And then we made recommendations on how to enhance that with the redundancy. So much of this is there's already established communication channels at the county level through OES and with redundancy as well. But we also said, yes, put WPS and GETS in place if you don't have that already. And some of the transit agencies have done that already and have already done that in the past. So then we are also making recommendations on maybe alternative methods of communication. One network of agencies have put together a radio system where they may have a radio at each of their dispatchers' locations. So that could be an alternate form of communications. And then we've also recommended, and Brent can speak more to the whole communication side, but also amateur radio is another means of communication. So Brent, do you want to talk a little bit more about the communication side?
Just very quickly, Commissioner, I want to revalidate exactly what you said about the landlines, POTS lines, plain old telephone service lines, which are hardwired coming in, not digital lines, but hardwire, the old familiar AT&T type stuff. We are big advocates of that because they're self-powered and they don't go down when a PSPS event occurs and so forth. So they remain operational. So that's something that we think any office should have. On amateur radio, that's the one system that actually has never failed in a disaster nationally or internationally. And we've encouraged the different locations to identify people that they have that may have amateur radio license capability as an additional backup for sharing information. But I also want to emphasize, as William's talking about, we did look extensively at regular radio frequencies and other backup capabilities. And I think each of the groups is doing a pretty good job of identifying that. So thank you for bringing it up.
And just my one follow-up is, I guess it's a comment. You were talking about how, oh, well, we'll wait and do a tabletop, when we can do it back in person. What happens if the emergency happens between now and then? So I guess I'm just wondering if there might be some value in saying, okay, we have these realities of COVID. If we have a secondary emergency between now and the end of COVID, maybe doing an exercise, assuming that wouldn't be a bad idea.
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, we are looking at exploring also how to do it online as well. We've done a kind of exercise where we had breakout groups already as part of our process. So we can do it. We just wanted to wait just a little more to see if we could have the opportunity to meet in person. So if we don't, then we'll certainly do it online. As well, not only is the exercise important, the training to the plan is really the next step. And that's one of the phase 5. How do you train all the transit agencies and in coordination with OES and OEM to work together? So training is particularly important as well as an exercise.
Great questions. Thank you. Any other questions? or comments? Commissioner Haney.
This might be for Darren. Hey, Darren, how did the other agencies coordinate their activities? How does Gold Coast interact with VCTC regarding this study? And then how would the trolley service up here in Ojai coordinate with between Gold Coast and then to VCTC? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, so I mean, that's one of the reasons, Commissioner Haney, this study was being done. I think we certainly, when we found ourselves in the middle of an event, we actually had a fairly decent coordination as it was, but I think the study is going to give us even more, you know, it's going to improve and refine how we have conducted our business over the course of prior emergencies. So as has been mentioned, we do have VCTC effectively represents transportation at the Ventura County EOC. So I've designated Martin Erickson as our individual who sits in the EOC when it's activated. And then Martin has the contact information with all of our transit operators. And if there's a point where we are having to engage with Caltrans or CHP, we continue to run point on that, but in many cases, law enforcement will be contacting CHP. So it sort of depends. But as it relates to the public transit operators, we sort of serve as the single point of contact. And then if we have need for resources and public transit is engaged, Martin, in his capacity as our designee, makes those contacts with whatever operator we would need to communicate with.
And I just wanted to note that all of the transit operators have been involved through this process and we're on our stakeholder committee and have been given the draft to review as well.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Commissioner White.
Thank you very much. I've been watching all your people on the screen here, and I've been noticing Commissioner Humphrey, that seems to me like he probably has a lot of feedback on something like this. I just like to know, with his with his huge bit of information that's in his head, what's your first reaction to all this, Brian?
Madam Chair, in an interest to be responsive, can you hear me okay? I've had some audio issues. I look at these kind of plans all the time. It's what I do in my living, and I have not seen a better plan put together for the transit sector and transportation sector than the one I see today. The two issues that should draw your most important attention is Article 1.9, and that begins the effort of sustainability. And Darren, I hope that you as our CEO will be making certain that the person assigned to keep this project alive, that 1.9 section talks about it's a perpetual document. As soon as you put it on the shelf, it begins to decay. And the focus here is to make sure that that one person is part of their annual assessment, that this is a checkbox, that they must assess that. And secondly, I'll compliment Commissioner Crosswhite, and when she talks about communication, that's the key. Who knew what and when, and who did what and when. And the most important element here really hasn't been touched on. It's called the CFP, our Communication Failure Protocol. And doesn't drive on any one telephone or POTS or not POTS or GETS, government emergency telephone, but the fact that when things go wrong, that there is a checklist, that there is a plan, and if even it means Darren getting on a bicycle and riding to the EOC, if that's the last line in that, that's what has to happen. So yeah, it's a great plan. It's very well put together, and I draw my, again, immense compliments to the staff to keep this ongoing and perpetual.
Thank you, Commissioner Humphrey, and I see a huge smile on Ms. Grasti's face, so very pleased to hear that, I'm sure. Are there any other questions or comments?
Commissioner Long?
This is Kelly Long. I just had a question for Darren. If you guys are involved in the Ventura County Emergency Planning Commission too, correct?
I'm sorry, Commissioner Long, you broke up a little bit there. Are we involved in?
The, hold on, I was doing battery and charging at the time. In the planning, the Emergency Council, Ventura County Emergency Planning Committee we have.
If,
Are you, is VCTC a part of that?
I will have to double check with that, Commissioner Long, but since we are a recognized partner through the EOC, if that's an extension of EOC, then I am sure that Martin is playing some sort of role in it as our designee, but we will confirm that and inform the commission.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and yes, we are. We're working with their emergency operations planning team.
Excellent. Thank you. This is also a receive and file, so no need to vote on this. And I want to thank our two presenters, Brent, you were still there, and William, there you are. Okay. Thank you both very much on a very detailed presentation. Thank you, and important. All right,
Thank
and
you
with
so
that,
much.
we move on to the next agenda item, which is number 11, and that is on the connected multimodal corridor study, the final draft, and that will be presented by Ms. Brooks. We'll give you some time to transition. There you are. Hello.
Good morning. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. I seem to be having a technical difficulty. One moment.
I have the same difficulties every time I turn my computer on.
I did this 1,000 times and it seems like I can't get this to appear for us all. Let me pull it up on this screen.
Oh, that looks like progress.
Yes, here we are. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, we can, Caitlin.
Okay, sorry, I
Love it.
apologize for that. I know it's been a information-packed morning, so I will try to be brief here. Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Caitlin Brooks, and I am the Program Manager of Transportation Planning at VCTC. So we are entering the final stage of US 101 Communities Connected. We have gone to the public with the final draft. And so we are bringing the final draft to your commission for final feedback. So I'm going to give a project overview, some of the things and examples that are incorporated into the study, and then some of the changes that we've made since we were last at the commission. So the purpose of the plan is to, one, study current and future mobility in the corridor, and then to also identify infrastructure improvements that strengthen mobility. So we're really looking beyond the mainline 101 freeway and outside of the freeway at arterials, transit and active transportation projects. And then also one of the main purposes for this plan is to make us eligible to compete for SB1 Solutions for Congested Corridor Program funding. So this plan has to be in place in order for us to be eligible to compete for that funding. So as you all know, there are multiple projects on the 101 freeway. So I just wanted to briefly touch and hopefully clarify the difference between 101 Communities Connected and Our Future 101. So like I said, this is just beyond the 101 freeway. We're looking at all modes of transportation and 3 miles out on either side. And it's a very general look at all of the projects to give us a comprehensive view of the projects in this study area. And then Our Future 101 is an alternatives analysis, preliminary design and environmental assessment for specific highway improvements. So potentially adding 1 HOV express bus lane in each direction and add auxiliary lanes at various locations, specifically on the 101 main line. So the study area is between State Route 23 in Thousand Oaks to State Route 33 in Ventura, and then 3 miles out on either side of the mainline freeway. And that's to capture all of the projects in between cities to hopefully improve connectivity and really take a look at what we have planned on the books. So this project was based in accordance with the CTC Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan guidelines. It's in line with state goals, regional goals, and we did this in partnership with our local stakeholders. Really looking, it's the first time that we've done a comprehensive view of all of the projects within the study area to see the best way in prioritizing projects to get the most for our money in this area. So this is an example of something that's in the plan. Right now, there are 1.9 million daily trips just within this study area. It's quite a bit of movement. About half of the population of all of Ventura County is within this study area, and about half of all of the jobs of Ventura County are within the study area. So it is a key part of Ventura County's transportation system. And we are anticipating an increase of about 11% in daily trips moving forward. So that makes it even more important for us to prioritize projects, especially with the limited funding that we have. So our goals were developed to evaluate projects in a multimodal context. It can be challenging to evaluate a highway project versus a transit project versus an active transportation project. So we developed these 5 goals and went to the public and asked them to rank them and prioritize them and what was most important to them so that we could more heavily weight the projects that ranked highest in those categories. So we did in-person public workshops in January of this year when we could in Ventura and Camarillo, and we gave them transportation dollars and asked them to rank the goals that were most important to them. We also did online outreach and engagement throughout the county to get everyone's input. And we had planned public workshops for Oxnard and Thousand Oaks of this year, but we had to transition due to COVID-19. So we did online workshop presentations where we did video recordings of the project into these categories. We also had a Spanish translation of the project overview. They were available on our website. So we really beefed up our online outreach. We sent e-blasts out to our contact lists. We did advertising on the Spanish language radio stations throughout the day to direct people to the website to watch the video, ask us for copies of the study. And then we also did boosted social media ads and reached about 49,000 people all throughout the county, because not only is it about people who live within the study area and travel within the study area, a lot of people may work there or move throughout the corridor for their recreational purposes. So we wanted to reach as many people in the county as possible. So we received quite a few public comments on the draft study, most of which you can see were on the wildlife crossing. And it's important to note that a lot of those specific comments were for Our Future 101, and we are directing all of the comments we received where they need to go. So those will all go to the Our Future 101 project team. Transit comments will go to our partner transit agencies. And so we're directing them as necessary, but also incorporating them into our final plan. So the project list is sort of the star of this study. It's a comprehensive look at all of the projects that we have planned within the study area, and it's based on the SCAG RTP SES, the FTIP, the corridor cities, CIPs and ATPs, as well as input from TTAC and Transcom about what they want to see in the corridor. So even if it wasn't directly in a project list, but they had something that they would like to do that was feasible, we incorporated it into our project list. So we have a performance evaluation framework based on these 10 performance measures. So we used a data-driven evaluation to look at these projects in a multimodal context. Like I said, it's hard to just look at these projects based on their attributes without looking at them with these performance measures where you can evaluate them. It's a little bit complicated, but we use a data-driven approach to more heavily weight the performance measures that were important to the public. So we categorized them into the project types. We looked at qualitative evaluations and then quantitative evaluations, where their locations were. Are they near disadvantaged communities and transit stations, low VMT area? And that was all fed into a communities connected index. So this is also an example of something that's in our study. We have the cost versus the communities connected index. An example would be Our Future 101, the HOV Express bus lane and auxiliary lane project, ranked very high on the communities connected index, but it was also quite expensive. So another project, the Santa Paula Branch Line Recreational Trail, ranks very high on the communities connected index. It did very well in those performance measures, and it doesn't cost nearly as much as some of those other highway projects and improvements. So it's something to take a look at when we prioritize funding in the future. So originally we did not have a section addressing COVID-19, but we thought that it was really important to acknowledge that in this study, we did it in the middle of a pandemic and there were dramatic changes to travel patterns, especially within the corridor. So we wanted to acknowledge that a lot of the travel pattern forecasts that we had originally are subject to change. We don't know what this looks like and what how some of these patterns, whether they're going to be long lasting or not. So, and then a lot of the funding has also been impacted. So we added a section to address COVID-19. So this is an example of something that we looked at. We looked at Google Community Mobility Reports, which is basically cell phone data, and it reflects what we've all seen. There's been a huge decline in commuting, especially within the study area. Retail and recreation are down, mostly because people are utilizing teleservices like online shopping. grocery and pharmacy are down, less people traveling to the grocery store. Parks are up because there's been a huge uptick in active transportation, people purchasing bicycles. And so maybe that's something for us to look at in the future. If this is a long lasting effect, we invest more in active transportation projects. And then as we've all seen as well, transit ridership has taken a huge hit. And so we're hoping for a rebound in the future as we move forward. But all of this plays into funding. So gas tax has been in decline. We have an uncertain future. We don't really know what funding looks like, but that's why it's going to be so important to make focused strategic decisions about funding prioritization, because we're going to have very limited funding in the future. And so that's sort of what this plan is looking at, all of the projects that are on the books, and how are we going to get the most for our money with what we have moving forward. So some upcoming activities, we're planning to apply for Solutions for Congested Corridor Program funding through SB1 in cycle 2022 with this plan in place, hopefully. And then we received a Caltrans Sustainable Transportation Planning grant to update our Ventura County Comprehensive Transportation Plan. And so that is kicking off this month, and it will be a county-wide look at transportation in the county and how we're going to move forward with our transportation and what's important to us as a whole. And that is it. I welcome your questions. Our consultants who prepared this study, Iteris, are also here today, and we are requesting your feedback by November 18th, if possible. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Brooks. Appreciate it. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? I don't see, oh, Commissioner Haney has his hand up.
You know, thank you, Chair. I think the biggest concern I have with anything of this magnitude is the communication side of it. And again, I just, when I look at, and I could be wrong on this, but I look at 264 comments out of 1 million people. I'm sorry, that's just that percentage is so small. I couldn't figure it out quick enough. But I'm just a little lost here as to how we proceed forward and try to stay into the 22, is that what I heard, funding date? And still provide more opportunity for this to be presented to all of our communities better and to maybe receive more communications. So I don't know what the question is, but do you understand what I'm directing it at?
I do understand. I think, you know, it's especially now, and we had to transition to online outreach. It's really a challenge for us to compete for attention with a plan like this. We did our best trying to spread the word and go to all of our partner local stakeholders to have them spread the word about this plan. And we are doing our best. I'm sure we can improve in specific areas to try to reach more people. But for funding in 2022, this is new funding through SB1, and this plan has to be in place in order for us to compete for that funding. I agree that I wish we had more feedback, but the feedback that we did receive was very specific, and it did shape the direction of this plan on what people really care about within this corridor. I am hoping for more participation in the comprehensive transportation plan. And as we reach out to our community partners, getting them more involved at a local level with local stakeholder, environmental groups, and getting them involved in the beginning of the process so that we have them moving forward throughout the plan. But I can understand what you're saying, and I appreciate your comment. I am always looking for more feedback. I wish we could get the word out more, but I think unfortunately in a pandemic, it has been a big challenge for us to compete for attention with a plan like this with so much going on.
Caitlin, I agree with you. And also I'm not questioning your efforts, and I'm not questioning you. I'm just bringing up the fact that it's just a small amount of comments for something as large and as expensive as this is going to be. So that's just my concern. But thank you for your efforts.
Thank you.
Commissioner White.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just real briefly, I just want to show my appreciation to all the work that Caitlin and her staff have done. But I also noted that there's more active transportation going on right now with the COVID. And I think that's going to continue. Bicycles are out there everywhere. That's all you see. You see people in parks, things like that. And I hope that we continue to look at that, even though that's a small part of this whole transportation plan. One last question. You need input by when? November 18th, is it?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other commissioners? None. Okay. I do have a quick question regarding the outreach raised by Commissioner Haney. Is VCTC allowed to use direct email to email residents and reach them in their inbox?
We do. So I think with the, and we reached out to our council about this. I know with the update to regulations on who you can and cannot and whether you can opt out, we have an email list. I think it's about a 2,500 person email list, and we sent e-blasts out, and it's to people who signed up for our emails. So people who wanted information about projects that we're doing. So we do have an email list that we send out direct emails to.
I see. Okay, because there are services available where you can actually purchase lists. And so I was just wondering whether that is an option in order to reach a wider audience. Those lists are not cheap. All right. And this is also, well, not necessarily listed as a receive and file, but certainly you are looking for feedback, correct?
We're looking for feedback, and we're planning to come back for hopeful final adoption at the December meeting. So if you have any comments or questions for us to incorporate in the plan, please send them to us by November 18th.
Excellent. Thank you. All right.
I have a question, because we are in a different world now because of COVID, and we have seen a huge drop in traffic because people aren't going to work in schools and things like that. I'm just wondering if the projections are at all different. I don't know if it's too soon to be discussing that difference, if there is, but I'm just wondering, we just base it on models that were done before COVID. So just kind of throwing that out there.
Yeah, and I think that's why we added the moving forward section, because there is so much that's uncertain. We don't really know how long lasting some of these commute patterns will be. And so it's hard for us to project, into the future of what will it look like, how many people will continue to use teleservices like telehealth, teleeducation, and telecommute. We don't know. And so we just added a section to address that uncertainty. But as of right now, this is a living document. So in the future, when we update our project lists, we incorporate the fact that there are new technologies and things have changed. And so we can update it in the future as well.
Thank you. And when you think about it, at one point we were talking about, becoming an MPO ourselves, combining VCOG and VCTC, so we can have those kind of discussions. But when you think about it, the impact of what has happened with us with COVID and the need for affordable housing and the concept of using all these empty retail and office buildings and things like that. So there is a lot going on that's different right now, and that can very much impact the land use patterns as well as transportation patterns. So we're at kind of a transitional time, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you.
And on that note, I would like to recognize the assistance by VCTC regarding the Michael Nasco bike lane dedication ceremony that happened on Election Day, thanks to Supervisor Parks. And that was made possible, as I said, with the help of VCTC. So really appreciate that. Speaking of active transportation, and Potrero Road is so much safer now. It's a delight to drive through there, which I actually do 5 times a week. So so thank you for that. And do we have any report from our General Counsel, Mr. Mattis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nothing to report today.
Okay, there are no agency reports, and with that, I will adjourn the meeting to our next meeting, which will be on Friday, December 4th. And I wish you a happy and safe Thanksgiving until then. Thank you. Good weekend.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.